I'm going to show you in this video that the right to buy scheme has been a massive transfer of wealth from common ownership into private hands, and is one of the main reasons why housing is unaffordable for the vast majority of young people in this country. First of all, what is social housing? Social housing, council housing, whatever you want to call it, is property that has been built by the government, either built by local authorities or central government. Yeah, which means, remember, government doesn't have any money. Governments don't make money. The only place that governments get their money from, really, is from you and I, and from people who are paying taxes. And we pay a heck of a lot of taxes. Not so much on wealth, but that's kind of kept hush-hush because the wealthy own the media. But a massive chunk of taxes comes from income taxes, national insurance, VAT, the taxes on fuel when you buy petrol or cigarettes or whatever, people use them things. That's where the vast majority of money comes from. And so social housing is actually housing that was paid for by taxpayers. And so the idea was, brilliant idea was that social housing would be there, and this would be housing stock owned by the state, i.e. owned by the people. The state were holding this property in trust for the people, and it was provided to people at much lower rents than would be the case in the private sector. You would live in your council home for life. Once you die or move on, then that council house, that property, will then go back into the pool to be given to somebody else who needs it. The right to buy scheme was introduced in 1980, and it's available to local authority tenants, and they're able to buy the property that they've been living in as long as they've been living in it for a certain amount of time. So initially, when it was, there had always been some sort of right to buy scheme in this country going back to the 19th century, I believe. But in 1980, Margaret Thatcher's new Conservative government changed things around a little bit. First of all, they made it easier for tenants to buy these houses. Beforehand, they had to go and get approval from local authority or from a minister or something like that. But then, as from 1980, all of that went out of the window. There were discounts. So the discounts, when you buy a property under right to buy, you buy it well below the market value. And the maximum discount when it was introduced in 1990 was 33%, increasing by 1% for every year of the tenancy above 3 years. I believe, looking at some other data, I believe that the average price that people paid for these homes was between 40 and 50% lower than the market value. So massive, massive discount. A no-brainer, frankly, for people who had the option of potentially buying their council house. And this policy proved extremely popular. Most political commentators will say that the right to buy scheme was one of the most important things that transformed the Conservative Party's profile amongst working class people, working class voters. You'll have heard terms like white van man, and this was a kind of caricature of the young male and female, lower middle class, higher working class persons who were said to have these aspirations. They didn't want to be dependent on the state. They didn't want to just be getting welfare and all this sort of stuff. In the 1980s, I grew up in the 80s, and I was programmed with this ideology of, there was these people who were just sponging off the state, particularly Northerners, Scousers, people from Liverpool. And actually, those are the people who are to blame for the woes of the country. Sounds familiar, right? And then there was this alternative, ideology being put forward as well, that actually, no, aspiration. People want to soar high. People want to work hard. They want to get a nice house. They want to raise a family. They want to have their 2.4 children. They want to go on holidays, 1 holiday a year. They want to have a car. They want to have a parking space, all these kinds of things. And the Conservatives expertly, Margaret Thatcher and her crew, expertly programmed these people to lap up the right to buy scheme. And the right to buy scheme was very, very popular. As of now, something like 2 million homes have been sold under the Right to Buy scheme. Extremely popular policy. And of course, those people who bought their homes under the Right to Buy scheme obviously would become natural Conservative Party voters because of what the Conservatives did for them. One thing I should point out as well is that the local authorities were limited in what they could do with that money. It would be great if they could get that money from those sales and build some more housing. That would be perfect, wouldn't it? And then you've got this lovely equilibrium. Some people own their own homes, but then a lot of people would be able to live in social housing, which is being paid for out of their taxes and been paid for by previous taxes. But the local authorities were limited in their ability to actually buy more council, to build more council homes. Government building, house building has actually collapsed over the last 30, 40 years. And the worst thing about it is that in that time frame, since 1980, as I've said in my previous videos, house prices have skyrocketed for various reasons. One of them being that loads of council homes have been removed from the social housing stock and have been passed into private hands. And then these people can obviously go off and sell their properties at massively increased prices. And one of the most jarring and disgraceful facts is that upwards of 40% of homes that have been sold under the Right to Buy scheme have ended up where? Ended up in the private rented sector. In other words, either those people who those former social housing council house tenants who bought those properties from the state, either them or the people they've gone on to sell to are currently renting those properties now in the private sector. And of course, thanks to Thatcher and Major and Blair and all these governments, whereas there was a time where rents were controlled, rents would be kept low, mortgages would be kept low. There were a lot of steps in place, a lot of tools and techniques and checks and balances in place to make sure that the housing market did not get out of control, to make sure that basically people had somewhere to live, that they could afford to live in their community, with their family and close to their people. And it was a great thing. The past was a much more humane time in this country. Yeah, Britain was, still had their colonies and was gallivanting and traipsing around the world in the 20th century. However, domestically at least, thanks to the struggles of the workers, thanks to the struggles of the unions and other grassroots working class movements, particularly in between and after those wars, the 1918 war and also the 1945 war. Because of those things, because of you had the rise of the welfare state, the rise of the National Health Service, all because of the political pressure and activism of the working classes. But that was all being swept away in the so-called neoliberal phase. Starting in around about the late 1970s, you got Reaganomics in the US, Thatcherism in the UK. All of that was swept away. So not only were loads of social houses being sold off, the housing market blew up, because of all of the money being pumped in there, all of the restrictions being removed and rent controls being removed. And so house prices skyrocketed, rents skyrocketed. And those people who now had those homes from the Right to Buy purchases were able to cash in on those skyrocketing house prices and skyrocketing rents. And here's the thing, I'll need to look into this, but there's a good chance that a lot of those properties that are being sold, which were formerly commonly owned, that are being rented rather, privately rented, probably some of those rents are being covered by housing benefit because they're so high. And who's paying for that? Workers. People who are working today are paying the housing benefit so that people can pay the extortionate rents that are being collected by those lucky few people who were able to buy their properties under the Right to Buy scheme in the 1980s and 1990s before the housing market really exploded. This is why I say the Right to Buy scheme has been a colossal transfer of wealth from common ownership into private ownership. But anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. I'm going to talk more and more and more about these kinds of things because I think it's really important that people understand why life is the way that it is in Britain and in the West in general, so that we can see through the lies of the politicians and so that we can start to work out how best that we can go about changing things. Anyway, thank you for your time once again. My name's Eli Wananda. Check out my Substack, which is eliwananda.substack.com. Shout out to all of you guys who support my channel through the paid option on the Substack, who buy me a coffee. I really do appreciate you guys. I see all your messages, and I'm honored and grateful for your support and encouragement. There are some videos you might want to watch on this channel. There's one here which I talk about how we're all getting poorer and what we need to do about it. And then there's one here which YouTube will work out from its algorithm should go quite well with this one for you. All right? So take care of yourselves. I look forward to your thoughts, and I'll speak to you soon. Peace.